Thank you for joining us tonight for the Northwest Consumer Law Center webinar series. Tonight's webinar is how to get out of default on your student loans. My name is Amanda Martin, and I'm the Executive Director at the Northwest Consumer Law Center. I'm pleased to introduce tonight's special guest, Katie Box, who is an Assistant Attorney General with the Washington Attorney General's Office. Katie started her legal career as a staff attorney at Northwest Consumer Law Center, so we're delighted to have her back tonight to talk to you all about student loans. If you have questions during the presentation, please enter those in the chat box on your right. Katie and I will be answering your questions at the end of her presentation. This session is being recorded and will be available to view on our website shortly. Attending this webinar does not create an attorney-client relationship. This presentation will provide legal information and it is not a substitute for individualized legal advice. If you're seeking legal advice, we recommend that you contact Northwest Consumer Law Center to apply for our services after the webinar. Information on how to apply for our services will be provided at the end of the presentation. And with that, let's get started.
All right, hi everyone. As Amanda already said, my name is Katie Box and I'm an Assistant Attorney General of the Washington State Attorney General's Office. And I'm here to talk about how to get out of default on your student loans. So I'm just going to start off with a disclaimer that any opinions that I provide during this presentation are my personal opinions and cannot be attributed to the Washington State Attorney General or the Office of the Washington State Attorney General. So first, I'm just going to kind of go over the basic types of loans that a student loan borrower might have. So there's direct federal loans. Those are pretty common. There's several types of direct federal loans: federal subsidized Stafford loans, federal unsubsidized Stafford loans, federal plus loans, and federal consolidation loans, which is a combination of different types of federal loans. And depending on what year a borrower graduated from college, they could have a variety of other types of non-direct federal loans, such as Perkins loans or FFEL loans. But you're unlikely to have, I kind of put the years that FFEL loan program ended in 2010 and the Perkins loan program ended in 2017. And then there's also private loans. Those are non-federal loans. Many people have a combination of federal loans and private loans, or some have only private loans. And then I kind of wanted to explain the basic principle of being behind on your student loans. There's a default and a delinquency, and those have a very important distinction in the student loan law. So a delinquency is you're delinquent as soon as you miss a payment on your student loan. So the day after a payment is due and not made in full, you become delinquent on your student loans. But you don't actually reach a default status on your federal student for most federal student loans until you've been delinquent on your student loans for 270 days. And so until you reach the default, when you reach the default status, there's some serious consequences to reaching that status, like loss, you lose your eligibility for certain federal loan benefits like deferment and forbearance. And you lose your eligibility for federal student aid, and your loan is accelerated. So there's some of the potential consequences of reaching the default status. But if a borrower doesn't have to be in default status for their student loan to be reported to the credit bureaus. So if a borrower is delinquent more than 90 days on their student loan, then the student loan can be reported to a credit bureau as delinquent. So I'm going to kind of go over the CARES Act and how this affects student loan defaults and delinquencies as of right now. So the CARES Act, for those for sure most people aware, is emergency legislation that is intended to meet the urgent public health need in the face of the public health and economic needs in the face of the coronavirus, and it was signed into law on March 27th. So basically what the CARES Act does is it suspends all student loan payments and waives interest for direct and FFEL loans that are currently owned by the Department of Education. And the payment suspension is effective from March 13th, 2020 to September 30th, 2020. And an executive order extended the extension of both the payment suspension and the interest waiver to December 31st of 2020. And so again, so some FFEL loans, all direct loans are held by the Department of Education or owned by the Department of Education. So the payment suspension and interest waiver is gonna apply to all direct loans, but not all FFEL loans are. So it just depends on what type of FFEL loan you have as to whether this payment suspension and interest waiver will apply. And it's always possible to consolidate a non-qualifying FFEL loan into a direct consolidation loan in order to make it or for it to fall under the CARES Act. But if a borrower consolidates, they will potentially lose any credit earned already towards loan forgiveness, and any unpaid interest on the loan will capitalize. So, and what the CARES Act did, and its extension via the executive order, what the CARES Act did for anyone in default or delinquent on their student loans is it stopped all collection activity for anyone that's in default or delinquency from March 13th to December 30th, 2020, and it basically released any withheld tax returns that were withheld to repay defaulted student loans that were were in the process of being withheld on or after March 13th, 2020. So I'm going to start with the delinquency stage. So that's when you're behind on your student loans, but you haven't yet reached the default stage, so you haven't been behind on your student loans for more than 270 days or more. So during the delinquency stage, there's many options available to a borrower who's struggling to make their payments. So, I mean, one of the most important things is to understand is there's many different, for federal loans, there's many different repayment plan options that a borrower can enter into in order to, minimize the risk of continuing or re-entering default. And some of those are the income-driven repayment plan, an extended repayment plan, and a graduated repayment plan. In the income-driven repayment plan, the payments can be as low as $0 per month because it's all dependent on the borrower's income. So it's really important to look into that stuff if you're delinquent on your student loans in order to move forward in a way that's not going to keep repeating the process of the delinquency. There's deferments, and deferments can be granted for various reasons. There's an economic hardship deferment. That's probably the most common one. So if you can qualify for that, then sometimes that's a good option to postpone payments completely if an income-driven repayment won't work for you. And there is a forbearance. A forbearance can be used to bring your loan current. If your loan is delinquent, you cannot do that. You cannot use this to bring your loan current. There are loan servicer cannot use this to bring a loan current if the loan is at the default stage. But it's possible that a forbearance can be used to bring the account current, so then the borrower can determine what the best payment option moving forward is. So like maybe an income-driven repayment plan, and so that they can enter into one of those repayment plans without having to cure the delinquency. And in most cases, during a period of deferment or forbearance, interest will continue to accrue, and unpaid interest will capitalize when the forbearance or deferment period ends. And that kind of depends. That's almost always true with forbearances, and it's sometimes true with deferments. It depends on whether the loans are subsidized or unsubsidized, whether interest accrues during periods of deferment. But those are some of the options. So, and then we'll go into options to get out of default on federal student loans. So again, default is when your loans have been delinquent for 270 days or more. And so there's kind of three main options that come into play when your loans are in default. You can pay them in full. That's not an option for most borrowers who are in default. There's a program called a rehabilitation program, or you can consolidate your loans to get out of default. And then I'm going to go over each of those options other than the pay in full, because that's pretty self-explanatory. So a rehabilitation, a borrower can enter into rehabilitation to get out of default on federal student loans. It's a federal program. And for a direct or FFEL loan, the borrower must agree in writing to make 9 voluntary monthly payments within 20 days of the payment due date. So the rehabilitation payment is typically 15% of the borrower's discretionary income divided by 12. And it's possible to request a lower monthly payment if you provide documentation of your monthly expenses, and it's kind of in the servicer can determine whether a lower monthly payment is appropriate. And then to rehabilitate a defaulted federal Perkins loan, a borrower must make a full monthly payment each month within 20 days of the due date for 9 consecutive months. So some of the kind of benefits, or just some basic information about rehabilitation is, so if you rehabilitate a defaulted federal student loan, the record of default will be removed from your credit report. However, your credit report will still show the late payments that were reported by your loan holder before the loan actually went into default. So before the 270 days hit and your loan went into the default status. And again, the credit reporting starts 90 days after 90 days of delinquency. And then a borrower can only rehabilitate a loan one time. So this is only an option to do once. So just something to keep in mind. And so then this slide is about how the CARES Act affects the rehabilitation. So the Department of Education issued some guidance on how the CARES Act affects the federal rehabilitation program. And basically what it says is that if a borrower enters a rehabilitation program during the payment suspension period effective under the CARES Act and extended by the President's executive order, that any payment that comes due and is suspended after the borrower enters into the rehabilitation program is going to count towards their rehabilitation payments. So they even give an example. So if you enter the rehabilitation agreement on September 5th and your payment was due September 15th, then you're going to get September, October, November, and December all counted towards your rehabilitation, towards your 9 qualifying rehabilitation payments during the suspended program. So you don't need to make payments for those to actually count. So because they're suspended. And then the next option to get out of default, separate from the rehabilitation, is consolidating to get out of default. So under the direct loan consolidation program, you can consolidate almost any type of a federal student loan into a direct consolidation loan. To consolidate a defaulted federal student loan into a direct consolidation loan, the borrower either has to agree to repay the direct consolidation loan under an income-driven repayment plan, or make 3 consecutive voluntary on-time full monthly payments on the defaulted loan before consolidation, and then they can enter into a repayment plan after consolidation that's not an income-driven plan. If you consolidate a defaulted loan, the record of default will remain on your credit history. So that's a major difference between using consolidation to get out of default and using the rehabilitation program to get out of default. So the consolidation program doesn't clear the default history on your credit. And then something else to note is about, so if the default's on a consolidated loan, an already consolidated loan, a borrower can only reconsolidate a direct consolidation loan if there's one or more previously unconsolidated eligible loans included in the new consolidation. So if all of the borrower's federal loans are already consolidated and that consolidated loan goes into default, the borrower can't reconsolidate. But if the borrower has a FFEL consolidation loan, it is possible to reconsolidate a FFEL consolidation loan. And then this is just a chart that I pulled directly from the Department of Education's website that just kind of goes through a comparison of using rehabilitation or consolidation to get out of default on your student loans. And, I think I mentioned earlier that some of the issues with becoming defaulted on your student loan is that you lose many federal benefits that are available for having federal loans, like your eligibility for deferment, forbearance, choice of repayment plans, eligibility for loan forgiveness, and eligibility to receive federal student aid. And so these are basically, it shows that you get all of your benefits back if you use loan rehabilitation or loan consolidation, the only difference is that the default will not be removed from your credit history if you use a consolidation instead of a rehabilitation. So things to consider before consolidating or refinancing federal loans with a private lender. So it's possible to go through a private lender and consolidate your federal loans or refinance your federal loans. You can even consolidate your private and federal loans through a private lender. And so often people want to do this because the private lender might offer a lower interest rate than is available on federal loans. So sometimes it could possibly be a good option, but something that people should consider before doing this is that if you consolidate federal loans with a private lender, you're going to lose all of those federal benefits kind of that we just talked about that you lose when you're in default. It's kind of the same principle. So you're not going to be able to go into income-driven repayment plans, no deferment or forbearances. Some private lenders do offer some form of those, but they're not going to be as good as the programs offered through the federal loan programs. Loan forgiveness programs are not available through private lenders, and there's no rehabilitation program if the loan goes into default. And federal loans offer protection for loan forgiveness in the event of in the event of death or total and permanent disability, and those may not be available under a private lender. I just wanted to touch on how to stay out of default. So if you get your loan out of default, what are the main things you can do to make sure your loan doesn't go into default again? And I think the number one thing is picking the best payment plan for you. There's many repayment options for federal student loans, and this is talking about federal student loans only. So standard, graduated, extended, and IDR are some of the options. And especially the IDR plan, depending on your income, your payment can be as low as $0 per month, depending on if your income's low enough. And there's different payment plans available, setting your payment at 10 to 20% of your discretionary monthly income. So there's really a way to get an affordable payment for basically everyone under an IDR plan. So it's often a really good option for people. And also IDR has some other benefits that are really important because it can lead to loan forgiveness, and some of the plans provide a federal interest subsidy, so the government will pay some of the interest on the loans that accrues if you're in an IDR plan. And so in some situations, a deferment or forbearance may be an option to temporarily suspend payments. In many cases, interest will accrue during the period of deferment or forbearance, and I talked about that earlier, and the unpaid interest will capitalize, and any period of deferment or forbearance will likely not count towards your loan forgiveness requirements. With deferment, there's many different types of deferment: economic hardship, there's military, there's in-school deferment. So it just depends on your situation whether deferment is a good option for you. And forbearance is generally only a good option for a temporary short-term hardship. It's really just important to get into the right payment plan for you so that you're getting all the forgiveness benefits, the interest subsidy, and all of that, and working towards actually paying off the loans someday if that's the end goal. Then getting out of default on private student loans. So there's less options when it comes to private student loans because private loans don't have the same protections and flexible repayment options as federal loans. So any flexible payment options or anything like that may be available on a private loan is going to be in the promissory note. So it just depends on the lender what kind of options will be available. There are some lenders offer like rate reduction programs and things like that. So it's just kind of a case-by-case situation, and you can contact your lender and determine what options are available to you. And a lot of them offer for like forbearances as well with a fee. And some private student loan lenders are implementing special programs in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So it could be worth it to contact the lender to see if there's any special programs to help borrowers in default and see what could work for them. And then bankruptcy is potentially an option. Many, but not all student loans are non-dischargeable in bankruptcy. So that's a factor, but sometimes a Chapter 13 bankruptcy can help a borrower with non-dischargeable student loans obtain reasonable monthly payments on their student loans at least. So And that's kind of it. I think that this is just a slide of resources, kind of what I based the presentation on. It's mostly the website in the Department of Education and the Attorney General Student Loan Survival Guide. So that's it. Thank you.
Questions. If you have any questions, go ahead and enter those in the chat box on your right. And Katie, I'm gonna ask you a question about private student loans. Are private student loan lenders required to offer any type of repayment plans or getting out of default plans?
Not really, no. I mean, some of them negotiated and agreed to offer programs in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, but there's no formal requirement. So.
It doesn't look like we have any other questions for you tonight. So thank you so much, Katie, for joining.
Oh, someone asked to see the previous slide of resources. It's right there.
Thank you. While we are leaving up the resource guide, I'm going to invite everyone watching the webinar to join us for our next session in the Northwest Consumer Law Center webinar series. It is called Taking the Risk Out of the Retail Installment Sales Contract. If you've ever bought a car before, you have very likely signed one of these contracts. And if you're like most people, you probably did not read the entire thing. So Northwest Staff Attorney Alyssa will be sharing what's actually in the contract and how to protect your rights when you're buying a used car. That webinar will take place on Wednesday, November 18th at 6 p.m. You can sign up online at northwestconsumerlawcenter.org/COVID-19. Also, be sure to check out our website to see other recordings of webinars in this series. Sessions on student loans, mortgages, foreclosures, bankruptcy are available to watch 24/7. And again, you can find those at northwestconsumerlawcenter.org/COVID-19. If you're seeking legal representation, you're welcome to contact Northwest Consumer Law Center to apply for our services. I'm going to go ahead and move it to this slide. You can apply online at nwclc.org/get-help or by phone at 206-805-1712. We provide legal help for those of low and moderate means in Washington State. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and thank you so much, Katie, for that wonderful presentation. Take care.